Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks again for joining us this morning for out those at the West Coast and afternoon here in the East Coast. My name is Dux Raymond Sai, and Joel and I today will be talking about best practices for upgrading and migrating to SharePoint 2010. Joel, care to welcome everybody?
Hey, how's it going? Good to be here on this webcast. And I hope we've got some special things for you. It's good to be here with Dux. It's good to be here, Dux.
Great, same here. Just to make sure we're all on the same page and want to set the right expectations on what we're going to cover. So in this presentation, really, we're going to give you the best overview we can in 1 hour on how you can properly plan, budget, manage, and control 2010 migration project. I just finished 2 SharePoint 2010 migration projects, managing it. So I'm going to share on my end what are some of the key points I've learned, key things that you should watch out for as you plan for it, especially around working with management, engaging the users, looking at existing 2007 implementations, thinking about things like should you automate content migration or do you manually do it? So I'll look at that first piece, and then Joel will talk about a lot of the technical pieces around the upgrade. So looking at some of the considerations moving to 64-bit, looking at which upgrade method would be appropriate, in-place upgrade, and I think Joel is going to go through a lot of good details with the different upgrade techniques, correct?
Oh yeah. Yeah, in fact, that's what I find about upgrade is it's really about making a good strategy for how to, what method to use and different mitigation strategies for uptime and preparing.
Wonderful. And also, I'm sure some of you here are still using SharePoint 2003. If you're using SharePoint 2003, just drop a note on the chat. Just say, yes, I am. We're still on 2003. We just want to get a good feel of who's still in 2003. It's okay. We won't tell anybody. Nobody? Oh, wow. That's good. All right. But, oh, there you go. So somebody's still on 2003. So we'll certainly talk about that, especially around our Q&A section. Great. So just a quick bio here. Joel, go ahead and introduce yourself. Sorry, I clicked on the slides.
Sure. So, hey, this is Joel Oleson. I've been working with SharePoint for 10 years. In December, it'll be. And what I do now is I do kind of product evangelism and SharePoint evangelism with Quest Software, helping them with their product strategy. But ultimately, what I do is I end up flying around the world and dropping in on user groups and events and sharing best practices and you know, giving presentations and connecting with the SharePoint community. But I started at Microsoft. I worked there for 7 years, working on SharePoint the whole time, working with 2001, 2003, 2007, and so on. And now I just love connecting with the community and sharing what I've learned and what I know. And you can actually,
going to world
I'd mentioned my
soon,
blog.
Right, Joel?
Yeah, in fact, I'm headed to TechEd Brazil next. Actually, I'm best practices in Baltimore. Yep, even Eric's on the line. And then I'm headed to Brazil for TechEd, and then I'm off to all sorts of places in Europe: Palestine, Germany for Tech Europe, and a user group in Oslo and Portugal, and SharePoint Saturday in the UK. Bunch of stuff coming up.
Great. Good, thanks, Joel. And there's Joel's contact info. Again, this is being recorded, and you should be able to watch this soon after the presentation. And here's my quick background. I'm with Innovative E. We're based out of here in DC, and we have presence in Atlanta and Colombo, Sri Lanka. My core area of focus is really around two areas. How you leverage SharePoint as a project management platform, and that's a book I wrote for O'Reilly Media. And of late, I've been managing a lot of SharePoint projects, looking at what are some of the best practices in terms of how do you plan, how do you scope well, how do you prioritize the business needs, and what features in SharePoint do you roll out first versus another. So that's the kind of work I do and the area I focus in. And just like Joel, well, not just like Joel, maybe a little bit like Joel, I go out and speak a lot. And in fact, next week in town is Best Practice Conference here in DC. And I'll be out in Singapore end of October and in Australia in November for SharePoint conferences as well. Well, great. So let me go ahead and get started here. These are the topics that we're going to look at. And really these key areas primarily start off with some planning. And I'm going to start off the discussion looking at some project planning tips for upgrade and migration. And then Joel will pick up with the pre-upgrade considerations and actual upgrade strategies. And then we'll open the floor up for Q&A. All right? So what I'd like to do is just straight up share 5 tips on how you plan for your 2010 upgrade. The very first thing that's critical is you have to step back and evaluate the organizational need. Meaning, we all know how SharePoint 2010 is great. We all know a lot of the different new features it provides. But really you have to step back and say, okay, why are we doing this? What's the benefit that it will provide to my organization? So the way you do that is you look at, first of all, if you already have a current implementation, the example I have here is 2007, but you might be in 2003. Hopefully not anything older than that. But think about some challenges that you have with that implementation. Why do you think 2010 will be better off? So let me give you an example. One of the organizations we work with is a university. And as some of you might be familiar, in the university setting, more than half of the population, well, not more than, around half of the population is using different platforms other than Microsoft-based platforms, using Mac, Linux, and whatnot. So what ends up happening, especially in this university, is a lot of their systems are powered by Microsoft toolsets. So obviously SharePoint is one of them. And the IT group found out that since some of the folks aren't using IE, for example, they're using Safari or Firefox and whatnot, they're not reaping the benefits of SharePoint as much versus IE because it uses some of the ActiveX controls. So what ends up happening is the IT help desk gets a lot of these ticket requests where, in fact, if they had IE, those ticket requests won't come in. So the challenge they had was, okay, we've got all these users, students, teachers, and whatnot, and all these ticket requests come in, and the help they're asking for, if they only use IE, it's going to work. Well, we heard that in 2010 it's cross-browser compatible now, so we can address that challenge. And it was a compelling case. And from that one little scenario, that challenge, we start looking at what the benefits are. Okay, so just that one use case, that one challenge, well, we're going to reduce our help desk support needs around people not being able to use it properly on the browser. And then we went through and looked at a bunch of other pieces on how 2010 would be beneficial. So what I'm trying to say is you have to quantify it. You have to map and say, okay, we've got SharePoint or we've got older version of SharePoint. People are using it, but these are challenges, and here's how 2010 can help us. So obviously you have to evaluate what the feature sets of 2010 are and how it could provide those benefits. But by just going around and saying, we got to do 2010 because it has 10,000 new things, it's all good, but it's critical that you map it to what it means for your organization and how it's going to help your organization. So that's number one. You got to evaluate organizational need. And I've written a lot of stuff around that and how you evaluate, so feel free to look it up. And I'll provide some resources for you as well once this is done with the email you get. Number two, so once you've identified why migration is a good idea, moving to 2010, you've got to identify and prioritize the scope. Okay? Now, what I mean by that is most likely there's a lot of little challenges that will pop up or business needs that will pop up that 2010 will address. But reality says you can't do it all at one time, at least initially. So what are some of the current considerations on how you prioritize your migration? First thing is, are we going to do this a big bang approach versus a phase approach? So for example, let's say you've got SharePoint deployed already to your organization, WSS3 or MOSS 2007. Are you going to move everybody one time? And how would that look like? Or would you do some kind of phase approach where, okay, let's try the IT group first and see how it goes, kind of like a quasi-migration pilot, and we're going to learn from that. Once that's done, we're going to move different groups and different organizations one by one. Now, assuming you're leveraging SharePoint enterprise-wide as some kind of an intranet or collaborative tool. But it's a different story if you're leveraging SharePoint with some of your custom app as well. Which goes to my next point. What are you migrating? Is it just migrating document libraries or lists? That's fine. But what about situations where you have third-party products in there? Migrate to these third-party products. Are they 2010 compatible, or do they have some kind of upgrade path to it? What about custom application? So you have to think about those and list those out. Automated versus manual migration. So in a recent project I got off from is the organization wasn't, well, a couple of things. The organization wasn't as large, however, they had a lot of content, and we evaluated should we purchase a third-party tool and automate the migration. Literally, it'll take content from things like libraries and lists and even recreate site structures and all that. Now, what we realized in their organization is when 2007 was put in place, it wasn't really architected appropriately, so they didn't do their information architecture, the taxonomy pieces weren't done appropriately. So we nixed the idea of automated migration because certain things didn't even need to migrate because it's just sitting there, they didn't need. So we had to do the fourth point here, re-architect the IA, identify which content needs to be around forever, which are project type of content. So after we remapped all that, and then we migrated the content manual, and it turns out that it was almost like a fresh migration, but we had to reattach a couple of databases as well. Then you have to consider two more things. Release management strategy. It's scary, but a lot of organizations don't have one. And let me describe what this is. So for example, especially if you have SharePoint in an enterprise environment, not only is it being used as a document repository intranet, there might be custom apps in it. How do you do development? How do you testing? What's your production environment look like? So what's the strategy around that? Do you have one? Does that apply to 2010? Or if you don't have one, what's your plan of coming up with one? So you have to think about those things. And last but not the least, what's your disaster recovery plan? So those considerations should be part of your planning even before you migrate. Number 3, allocate realistic resources. Based on number 1 and 2, okay, so we've got these needs, we've got these priorities. How much can IT take on? Or do you need to get external resources? Obviously, that has to go back to the discussion of budget as well, right? One of the things that's really important, 2010 is a great platform. However, to leverage it successfully, you have to have the right skill sets, you have to have the right mindset, so to speak, in making sure that you get the benefits out of it. What about technical investments for hardware, licensing for software? So one of the key things, and Joel will talk more about this, is hopefully most of everybody knows this, but if not, 2010 requires a 64-bit environment, so from the hardware to Windows 2008. Do you have that? What about licensing? So you have to think about those things as well, and who your audience would be in leveraging the 2010 platform. And then another key aspect is the development and rollout of relevant training. One of the key changes in 2010 that's obvious to the user is the user interface. It looks different than a prior version, and one of the big changes is, for example, the ribbon interface. Now, that might not be a big deal for those used to Office 2007 already. However, maybe in some organizations you haven't rolled out Office 2007. So what are your training considerations as well? So you have to allocate realistic resources, not only from the people who's going to do it, but realistic resource around training, allocate budget for that, and also realistic resource around who's going to run this whole thing. Fourth tip on planning for your migration. So you have to develop the migration schedule appropriately, and don't take the mindset of, we don't have time for this. Let's just stick the 2010 DVD in and let's just do it, right? Not a good idea. You have to step back based on number 1. Okay, what's the first need we're gonna deal with, and based on that, identify what things that needs to happen. These are the tasks and what the interdependencies are, the resources you need. And once you have this schedule present it to executive management. Say, look, this is what it's going to take to upgrade 2010, to upgrade our intranet from 2007 to 2010. So, yay, nay, what? Because unless you have everybody on the same page, right, and having the same set of expectation, the likelihood of failing, and a lot of times not even technology, is quite high. So you got to have a migration schedule and get everybody on the same page. And I have a sample schedule that I just used for one of my customers. It's actually available online. I'll email it to you. It's from a 2007 intranet to 2010 intranet upgrade schedule. Now, number 5, and this is the most, I think, important piece or important tip I could provide as you plan for your migration, is treat the migration as a project. Okay? And I've seen this so often where the IT organization look at upgrades, or even in this case upgrading 2010, as one of those afterthought. Oh yeah, we got this DVD from Microsoft. Who's going to do this? I don't know. Yeah, I'll do it in my spare time. So there's no sense of responsibility and accountability. But more importantly, if you don't treat it as a project, proper resources and proper budgets won't be applied to it. So it's very, very important that you treat the upgrade itself or migration itself as a project. And I like to use this word, but at the end of the day, the second bullet point there needs to be a clear definition of roles and responsibilities. There has to be a chokeable neck. Because if it fails, the last thing you want is people playing he said, she said games, right? So you have to have somebody responsible for this upgrade, somebody responsible planning for this upgrade, specifying the schedule, defining how much this will cost in terms of time and budget. Okay, so those are just some of the 5 tips I would like to share in my recent experiences. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Joel, and Joel, go ahead and talk about pre-upgrade considerations and some strategies.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dux. So the first thing I wanted to mention here is that this is actually some data that comes from Sean Livingston, who's the upgrade PM. And it kind of gives you this feel of upgrade being kind of a life cycle, and a lot of it being focused on first learning and then preparing your environment, mitigating risks, planning your uptime strategy and so on. But really the most important thing that gets skipped very often, and where failures definitely happen, is around testing. People not spending enough time testing and learning how these tools actually really work, and actually walking through the process before they've done it before they do it for real. A lot of people kind of take the impression that, oh, well, Microsoft will be easy, and so we can just do the upgrade. And it's a big mistake. In fact, by default, the worst thing you can do is just go ahead and install, just run setup, because it's going to run the in-place upgrade, which is most prone to failure. And as well, it's the slowest upgrade. And essentially, it's you're down the whole time. So there is no uptime strategy that would be deployed if you just run the default. So definitely you need to test it, you need to validate it, you need to run through the process of learning some of these techniques we're going to be talking about. Sorry. Now this is just a quick review. You've probably seen these requirements elsewhere, but really the emphasis here is no matter whether you're doing an in-place upgrade or database attach, highly recommend, it's required actually that you're running Service Pack 2 of SharePoint 2007 in either case. As well, the cumulative updates, and there's more recent ones now, but essentially getting those cumulative updates on your box is critical. And yeah, Service Pack 2 is a little bit finicky, but there's actually a lot of good stuff in there. I'm going to mention a couple major things that are in Service Pack 2 as we move along. 64-bit front and back, including SQL. We've got new requirements on Windows Server 2008 or R2. Some of the prerequisites that SharePoint itself will give you to make sure that the Windows is taken care of. But what often is missed is actually the SQL side of things. And it's actually true. SharePoint will fail to install if you're not running the right level of Service Pack, even for SQL. So that's very critical as well, that you're not just paying attention to your SharePoint servers, but also to SQL itself. Yes, on dev now, we can support Windows 7. That's not a production environment. And virtualization. I encourage virtualization now, and especially around upgrade. Highly encourage people to create virtual environment copies of their environment so that when they're testing, they're not just testing on an empty environment, but they're testing on a copy of what they really got in their production environment. Now, the first little tool here is the pre-upgrade check. I've preached a lot about the pre-upgrade check. I hope you've all had time to play with this. If you haven't, highly encourage you to go and check out the pre-upgrade check. It's a best practices analyzer. And essentially, in the best practice analyzer, it will actually run a set of rules and recommend, it'll tell you whether you're missing features or missing any issues, essentially, with your environment. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But you notice as well when you run this command tool, and it's actually part of SharePoint when you install Service Pack 2, it's just running stsadm-o pre-upgrade check. Runs these set of rules and it'll pop up an HTM report. There's actually 3 things it creates. It creates an HTM, it creates a log, and it creates a XML file. Now we're going to look at the HTM. Here you can see it gives you your site definitions. In your site definitions you can see whether they're all installed, if there's any that are missing. And oh, by the way, if you can't read this, just click that full screen button and you can see it a lot better. There is a lot of kind of small text here. But in that report, it talks about your features, your site definitions, and as well, if you're not running the right level of whether you say you're running Windows Server 2003 or 64-bit, it will actually show as failed. Now, if you're doing the database attach, those aren't necessarily as critical. What's critical is that your destination, where you're going to be attaching those databases, is on that level. You're running your Windows Server 2008 and 64-bit. As well was mentioned with SQL as well. So one of the other tools around pre-upgrade check is test SP content database. This is a PowerShell script that is actually in your 2010 environment. Essentially, you can use this PowerShell script and point it at some SQL server with some content database. And why I say it like that is it doesn't have to be connected to your farm. It doesn't have to be on the same SQL server as your existing SharePoint environment. But it does need to have the security as if you were going to connect that database. And what's unique about this test SP content database, it will essentially give you any errors that you would get if you were going to attach it. So it's almost like a what if. What would happen if I were to connect this content database? And it'll give you, like as in this example, this one happens to be missing a DWP file. Now, pre-upgrade check actually doesn't go to that level. So I encourage people, no matter whether they're running in-place upgrade or database attach, that they actually run both of these tools. On your source, you definitely need to be running the pre-upgrade check, and from either a test environment or from your future production environment, you're running test SP content database against each of your content databases. Now let's drill a little bit into upgrade strategies as well. Upgrade itself is 2 major pieces. There's binary upgrade and there's visual upgrade. With binary upgrade, there are 2 methods. There's in-place upgrade and there's database attach upgrade. Both of these will essentially install the binaries on your server, take advantage of upgrading your databases, but they don't touch the visuals. At least they're not supposed to. Second piece to this is the visual upgrade. Completely separate. It can be joined, but by default, it is a separate process that runs to upgrade your visuals, make it look like the new 2010 environment. That's when you get the ribbon, that's when you get the new UI and the new web parts and the all the new look and feel for what the users would see. Now, without running visual upgrade, the binary upgrade will give IT what it needs around the central admin and new service applications and so on. But the visual upgrade is a separate process that runs after the fact. And we'll drill into these in much more detail. In-place upgrade, it's all at once. You're down when you're running it, okay? And by the way, there is no kind of gradual where you can install both of them at the same time on the same farm, like you could in the previous version. You can't have both SharePoint 2010 and 2007 installed in the same farm. Now, this is the simplest approach, and even that I think is debatable. It is the most risky. There is no rollback in SharePoint. Now, if you have a virtual environment, that is one of the cases I say, well, if you've got virtual environment, at least this in-place upgrade does offer some level of rollback, but don't forget rollback of your databases. You can't connect a 2010 database to a 2007 farm. So if you're rolling back, you need to roll back everything. There is resume. That's one of the new features of upgrade, is its ability with a PowerShell script to resume the upgrade. You don't have to start over from the beginning. Now, the recommendations, like I mentioned, there is that test SP content database. I recommend using it with in-place as well. And as with all upgrade, definitely do a backup before you start. So kind of visually, here's one way of kind of looking at what happens. First, we're going to run a pre-upgrade check, fix any issues it discovers. Then we're going to upgrade the binaries in place by running setup. What this is going to do is it's going to uninstall the previous version, install the new version, and then after the binaries are there, we need to make sure that it all is working properly. Any issues that come up in that process, resume if necessary, and so on. Then we can run visual upgrade, which doesn't necessarily have to happen during the same time. Now, in-place upgrade does give you the option, actually, to run it all at once. In the options you'll see, when you're running in-place upgrade, you can actually decide to make it all look 2010. And you even have an option with customizations whether you want to keep them or not. So there are a few choices there in the in-place upgrade. The visual upgrade, again, it can be at the same time or not. And then after you're done, then it's the verification process. Now, one of the reasons, before I stop here, one of the reasons I don't recommend in-place upgrade for most deployments is because when it fails, you are already down, and the lack of rollback. That makes sense? If you fill up your drive, now you're going to the store to go get another drive, whatever, you're down. You know, it's a critical situation where there is no uptime during this in-place upgrade. The exception to that might be if you've made a copy of the farm or something like that. Database attach. Okay, so database attach is definitely safer, requires more planning, which is definitely a good thing. Upgrade itself, you're making a 2010 farm, so essentially it's done on a separate hardware. You're doing it database by database. And actually, visual upgrade applies to this as well. So as you're attaching your databases, there is a flag to force it to go to the 2010 UI, but by default, it's going to have the 2007 UI. Okay? And there's a couple different ways to attach the databases. You can use the PowerShell script of mount SP content database, or you can use STS-ADM -o add content database, just like you did in the previous version. If you try and add it through the UI, it will tell you, sorry, you can't do it. You have to use one of these other. Now, in the central admin UI, there is UI for being able to see what in progress is happening. But as well, one of the reasons why database attach is actually faster is because of this ability to do the parallel database attach, where you can open up multiple command windows for STS-ADM or PowerShell and do multiple upgrades at the same time. I had a conversation with IT recently, and their recommendation now is essentially one thread, or you're attaching multiple databases, so you have as many threads or no more than threads than you do cores on your boxes for front end. And actually it's SQL as well. So make sure you're watching the cores on your SQL box, I should say. This is as simple as it is. Now there's a progress indicator in attaching databases into 2010. You should run that, point at the database and the database server and the web application you're going to attach it to. And it just runs through there. In Central Admin, one of those cases you may want to take this full screen, but essentially there's an upgrade progress area where you can actually see the different jobs, when they start, when they end, how many sites have been upgraded, are there any errors, are there any warnings, and it even points to the log file. So it makes it a lot easier in this kind of Central Admin UI to see what's going on. And this log file starts immediately, as does this progress, where you can see it's in progress. And if you're doing multiple database attaches at the same time, you'll see all these different jobs in here. Essentially, that's what they are, is they're basically timer jobs. Now, one of the strategies, and this is actually something, like I mentioned, there's a couple things in here about Service Pack 2. This is another thing that actually came with Service Pack 2, and that's read-only database support. Essentially, if you set the database to be read-only, SharePoint, since Service Pack 2, now understands what that means. Before, somebody would go to upload a document and it would error, hey, something's going on, contact your admin. Now, if you set the database to read-only, it will actually trim the UI. So people that are going to upload documents don't see the upload button. It's like everybody has read access. Essentially, there's a lock that's passed on. So where you can even see inside actions here that they would see edit page and things like that and create site. Now those options are simply not shown, not displayed when the database is read-only. Now visually, here's kind of just a look at what's happening. We run pre-upgrade check on our previous version, on our source. We fix any issues. We're going to create that destination farm, the 2010 farm. We've got to figure out how to upgrade our services. There's a number of different methods for how to upgrade the services. Normally with database attach, essentially you're attaching the SSP database, you're attaching search. There's some PowerShell scripts there to upgrade those services. And I do say consider in place if you're doing a lot of investments for your services. And essentially what I'm suggesting here is the hybrid option of using in place to upgrade your config and to upgrade the services. In kind of just the clean database attach, what you would do is you would just attach the SSP and attach the search database and so on. You run test SSP content database before you add any of the content databases, address and fix any issues, and then actually, even before you attach the databases, you're going to set them read-only on your source, right, like we just mentioned. Then you're going to attach the content databases, new copies of them. And then once those are complete, you can then do your visual upgrade. Or you can even force a visual upgrade to happen as those databases are being attached. Now, a visual upgrade, a little bit of drill down into this. Definitely safe. Actually, this is a little bit different. Here's what a visual upgrade itself looks like. Essentially, this site is has been binary upgraded. And what you see under your Site Actions menu at the bottom, and if you don't see this, there's another way to get at it with site settings. But essentially, the site administrator can see the preview new visuals. And what preview new visuals will give you is the ability to see what the site would look like with the 2010 look and feel. And one thing somebody was kind of confused about the read-only. Why would you ever use read-only? Well, essentially, I had mentioned the in-place upgrade forces you to be down, right? You're down during the upgrade process. Well, with database attach, you're working with two different farms. So what you want to do is you want to set a read-only farm while you're doing the upgrade. The read-only farm allows people to continue to view the site, continue to see their documents, and so on. So that's why the read-only is such an important thing. And even if you're making a copy of your environment and doing an in-place on the second copy of your environment, you could still use read-only so that people aren't adding documents that you've later got to figure out, oh, what did people do while I was running the upgrade? That's why read-only is so important. So going back to this screenshot here, we've got the preview new visuals. If you click the preview new visuals, it gives you 3 options. And again, this is something that's a little bit hard to see here. But in these 3 options, we have the ability to roll back, go preview the 2000, see the 2007 environment, look and feel. The next one is, I want to see what my site looks like with 2010. And the third option being, I am ready, let's go to 2010. And so essentially that's committing the site to be a 2010 site. And what that'll do is it'll trim you'll no longer see the preview new visuals because essentially it's completing, it's like finalizing essentially the visual upgrade. And in preview mode here, you can see that there's actually, and if you have to go to full screen mode to see this, but essentially that yellow bar there says you're in preview mode, don't change anything in your UI while you're in this preview mode. But you can now see the ribbon, you can see additional site elements, and the new layout and so on for the 2010. Essentially what happens with 2010 is you get a copy of the v3.master and a v4.master and a minimalist master. So when you're running through this process, right now we're previewing what would it look like with this new master page. What breaks, and preview mode kind of allows you to go, skip back and forth between the looks until you're ready to apply this master page, or you want to apply this master page and then quickly apply your own master page. So essentially this is all about the visuals, all about the page layout and look and feel. Now, in addition, there's actually some PowerShell commands. And a couple of these we've already mentioned. The test SB content database, where you can check the database before you attach it. The mount SB content database, which is what's used to upgrade the database in database attach. Upgrade SB content database is actually resume. It's kind of ironic there that to resume upgrade, you run upgrade. And then for upgrading some of your shared services things, here we've got upgrade the SB Enterprise Search Service application. That's for your search database. And if you've got a single sign-on database, which is somewhat rare, there's a PowerShell script for that. Well, what about the SSP database? The SSP database actually falls into the category as well of running the mount SB content database. Okay. And as well, the upgrade SB content database applies to both. It's most commonly used in the case of in-place upgrade, where you're trying to resume the upgrade and you can actually specify a particular database or the whole farm, essentially. So kind of resume upgrade from where you left off. Now, there's also this concept of a hybrid upgrade. We've talked about these 2 methods. Well, you may actually want to use a combination of the 2 methods. And in this example, here we say, make a copy of your environment. Make a copy of your 2007 farm. That way you can set that source as read-only. And then you can run, what you might want to do is detach all your content databases, in the destination farm. Then run binary upgrade within place, which will upgrade your config database. It will upgrade all your services, and essentially it'll keep kind of a better set of what the configuration is. Essentially, that's why people might want to run in place, is because it's going to preserve more of your settings. Then, before we attach the content databases, we run test SB content database, and then we can run the database attach, which gives us the ability to run parallel database attach for multiple databases. And then, again, we can run our visual upgrade after that's complete. Now, what's interesting about Visual Upgrade is that it is a separate process if you want it to be. And essentially, I've kind of come up with kind of 3 common methods that you might see. One is going to be, I'm running, and I want to do all my visuals all at once. I've got my new 2010 master page. I've already worked with the design team. So as soon as upgrade's complete from a binary perspective, IT is also going to run Visual Upgrade. Then the last piece would be, so basically before the users see it, it's already running 2010, they've got their ribbon and so on. The next guy might say, I want to let my users run Visual Upgrade. I want the site administrators to run Visual Upgrade. And then in the third case, you get kind of a hybrid mode there where they want to do Visual Upgrade as a separate process, but they want IT to do it. So they basically want to do binary upgrade first, and then run some PowerShell scripts, essentially, to deprecate the UI, where users don't have the ability to run Visual Upgrade. And I've got a blog post on that, if that is interesting to anybody. Now, we've talked a lot about these different methods. What are some of the considerations around when they should be used, when to deploy them, and so on? And here's a few of the decisions. How customized is your environment? The more customized it is, the more likely you may either want to use a third-party tool, or you're probably going to want to run database attached so that you can essentially get out of some of those customizations and handle them, upgrade those features, upgrade those site definitions, and so on. The uptime. Well, database attach is the only one really that gives you, or the hybrid option, gives you the ability to have uptime. Extra hardware, having that second farm, gives you that ability to set your source read-only. But if you don't have extra hardware, are you forced into in-place upgrade? Well, no, you're actually not. You can still run a hybrid upgrade on that same source. Don't feel like you're forced into running the in-place upgrade. Now, if you've got a virtual environment, that's great for rollback, but also remember the SQL environment. And one case where I do recommend in-place upgrade is if you've got MSDE. Essentially, if you've got that basic install and you're running with the Windows Internal Database Engine, which I think actually is quite rare still. Microsoft thinks it happens more often. I'm kind of curious here. It doesn't. If anybody on the call has one of these kind of basic install, all in one box, well, this is a case where in-place upgrade is actually going to be used to move to SQL Express. So in-place upgrade will run that process of moving it to SQL Express. Now, just kind of quickly, with the SSP to now we have service applications. Each SSP, so if you've got 2 of them, or you've got 1 of them, or you've got 3 of them, you're going to each get a copy of Search Service App, the Profile Service App, Excel, and App Registry backward compatibility. So you're going to get a bunch of databases for each of your SSPs. And this basically applies to the in-place upgrade. With the database attach, obviously it depends on what services you're provisioning and whether you're attaching the search service or the SSP database and so on. So, I think we're getting now ready for the Q&A, so make sure you've logged your questions in here, and I'm going to have Dux join me. Come back. Dux, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, my hand was around my Mac, bad antenna. Anyway, what tools are available for auto content migration? So just to clarify, there's a lot of tools out there. Quest has tools, Metalogix has tools for content migration to 2010. So I guess it boils down to how much content you have, what kind of content you have. Things like do you want to keep the versions? Do you have any compliance requirements? Anything else you'd like to add around there, Joel?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of thinking about this. Why would you ever use a third-party tool? I've come up with a couple of good cases. One is you may be running 2003 and you want to go directly to 2010. I think a lot of people are, kind of overwhelmed by upgrade, and it's even more overwhelming if you've got to do it in two steps. You've got to do it to 2007 and then go to 2010. There might be people as well who have customizations. They've done some custom site definitions, or they've created some list definitions, and they may have built some features that are no longer interesting because now those things are already in 2010. They just simply want to get their data moved across. And even the third case, actually, people may actually want to reorganize their data in the process and make it much more of a gradual experience, or they don't want to bring everything across. They just want to pick and choose their documents or their sites and so on, and they may actually want to consolidate and collapse lists. So it's a lot of that cleanup process that a third-party tool would give you, that kind of gradual experience, or being able to not necessarily run it read-only, but run it read-write on both sides, and then being able to synchronize and things like that. Third-party tools would give you those options. And on the Quest side, there is a 2003 to 2010 tool. Migration Manager is what it's called. As well, there's a tool that gives you the ability to reorganize your data in 2007. That's also called Migration Manager. So that same tool allows you to resort and reorder your sites and site collections, move things around, stuff like that. And they're in beta right now is the 2007 to 2010 tool. So have to check those out.
Great. Do you see those questions on the question box, Joel?
I do.
On the right side? You can see it on your,
Yeah. Yep, I'm looking at them right now. And I'm not sure what the PUC changes. Okay, any information on PUC changes in what it reports after the cumulative updates after Service Pack 2. So I think what he's asking is the pre-upgrade check tool. And it is true that there are some fixes, essentially, to, most of what we find in the cumulative updates address upgrade issues. So it's one of the reasons I tell people, don't just install Service Pack 2, you should also get on the latest cumulative update, is because essentially Microsoft, anything it needs to fix around upgrade that it depends on the 2007 environment is included in those cumulative updates. And most of those fixes do relate to that. Are there any granular ones I can talk to in specific? I would say that things like the application templates, if those are missing, they have tried to provide more information about those. As well, what was listed as critical and what was listed as information, some of those things have been updated to make it much more readable in more recent cumulative updates post Service Pack 2. Next question is, what are the advantages of using SharePoint 2010 over Google Apps?
Yeah, there's been some great responses in the chat room. Eric and I think somebody else was responding to Paul. So I didn't want to repeat that, Paul, but one thing I do like to add, I think it's not a fair comparison. So personally, I think SharePoint is the most misunderstood product out there. It can certainly do a lot of the components with tools that are out there with open source tools like Google and etc. But for example, my answer to you is it depends what those 50 people do. And for example, if their day-to-day life, they use tools like as simple as Microsoft Office or Microsoft Word, one of the key benefits of SharePoint, there's built-in interaction and synchronization with tools like Excel or Word or Outlook. So imagine if, let me just give you a scenario. Let's say you're a team of 50 people and working on a project. You can put your meeting in a SharePoint calendar in the SharePoint site. You can make that meeting automatically appear in Outlook if you're using Outlook for your calendaring. So those kinds of synchronizations are built in. So just think of SharePoint, it's more than just a web-based platform. It's And that's what it is exactly. It's a platform. So it has tight integration with Windows and Office and obviously the web as well. Whereas with Google, for example, I mean, if I go back to that example, if I put a meeting entry in a Google Calendar, I can certainly make it show up in Outlook, but I have to download some kind of synchronization tool from Google. But other things, for example, if I upload a document onto my SharePoint site in a document library, I can make it show up in Outlook as well, which you can't do that in a Google site. So there are a lot of things that that I can say that's advantageous, but it also goes back to what are those 50 people doing? What kind of tools do you have now? So those are some of the considerations you have to think of.
Yeah, I think the other part people should consider is just because we're talking about SharePoint doesn't assume on-premise. If they're worried about the cost of and staffing of SharePoint, then they really ought to be looking at, well, there's all sorts of interesting hosted solutions where you can host for $5 or $10 a user with SharePoint, or create a hosted site with FP Web or Rackspace, or even the Microsoft BPOS S solution, the SharePoint Online. So don't just think of installing servers. There definitely are lightweight cloud-based solutions for SharePoint as well, which even like docs.com might be a better comparison, where you're basically sharing documents, and that's a free solution. So if cost is a concern and you're really just trying to share documents and so on, there are definitely cheaper ways of doing it. We definitely don't have to install servers to get the benefits of SharePoint. The next question is around the pre-upgrade checker. It says, I understand there's a pre-rec check tool. Is this part of pre-upgrade check, or is it a separate tool? There's actually a couple of different things. Pre-upgrade check is for your 2007 environment, and it's going to verify that the environment is good to go. There is a prerequisite checker on the install portion that's going to make sure that what's installed on the 2010 environment, or if it's in place, it's going to make sure that the software and so on that's on that box that you're installing 2010 on is running the latest patches and so on across Windows and .NET and so on. Next question is, what types of fix issues are you typically seeing? And I would say that the most common ones I see are missing features, missing site definitions, orphans, upgrades that aren't complete, like a Service Pack 2 that wasn't properly installed. As well, even if they aren't missing features or missing site definitions, it's the FYI of you have custom site definitions, you have custom features, and so you really need to be keeping track of those, especially if you're building a 2010 farm. You're going to have issues if you just simply create a clean environment, you start attaching those databases. Those are the types of fix issues you're going to get in the test SP content database of missing features or missing site definitions. What if I have a custom site master and default system master? Presumably pages using the custom masters will be unchanged, and those of the system.master will get the new SP 2010 look. That's a pretty complex question. First part of it is whatever master pages you've got now, it's going to make a copy of them. Essentially, it's going to set them as v3.master. So when it rolls back, it knows which ones to set them. If you are using a custom site definition, you actually might see that it's going to force the 2010 look. So there are some cases where it doesn't necessarily know what to do, so it's going to give you the 2010 look if it doesn't understand what to do. So again, this is an area where I recommend testing, so you can exactly see what's happening. And there are little things that do get thrown into the page, but Microsoft has really tried to not do anything during the binary process to that page. It's just some very lightweight things. Another visual upgrade question, is visual upgrade per site or web? And can you have some sites looking like 2007 and others like 2010? And the answer is yes. It is per site and web. You can actually choose. You can go down to the web level and upgrade the site. You can add a site collection. You can force it across the whole thing. One site collection can look like 2007, and others can look like 2010. So it really is a mix mash there. And you want to take one more question, Dux? I think we're about running out of time. And I'm happy to
looking at the chat
answer the rest of these questions on my blog. I'll capture these. Go ahead.
One of the questions couple questions I can address easily is virtualization support for VMware, or is it only for Microsoft? It's both. Obviously, for example, there's the guidance you'll get from Microsoft is going to talk to you about Hyper-V or Microsoft-based solutions, but you can build your virtual environment using VMware as well. Let's see. What is the best way from WSS3 to MOS 2010 or SharePoint Server 2010? A lot of what Joel covered, I mean, those are applicable, but it depends of what you have right now in your WSS3 environment, and how much content you have, or how organized it or how not organized it is. So it depends. But if you review this recording, again, Joel went through the different techniques in the upgrade. Did you want to address a couple more, Joel? I saw one with jQuery. Somebody was asking about how the existing jQuery used in 2007 would be affected if you moved to 2010. Personally, I had one client that had a couple jQuery code, and when we upgraded it, so far everything works, but I'm not sure if there's any known issues with jQuery. Do you, Joel?
Actually, that's an interesting question. Because of the way that it really depends on how they're deployed, first off. If they are in a library and that library gets upgraded, essentially it's the logic of the jQuery. Is it trying to replace something else, or is it trying to provide a light box? Most of the cases, what I found is it seamlessly just upgrades. You know, it's client-side code, and since the page really hasn't changed that much, it just continues to work. There's not any major structural changes that happen that would break it from what I've seen. But there are some cases, some people have reported where, they have had to update things when they've applied their new master page.
Yeah, the only thing I could say that could be an issue is some jQuery scripts, when you reference it, you reference the absolute path. Now that could be a problem, because if the path change, obviously, then it won't work. But other than that, again, it depends. But I haven't seen any known or outstanding issue around that. One more question I saw coming in and out is around Project Server. So somebody was asking about, when you upgrade to 2010, what about Project Server on the same farm? Do you have thoughts on that? Because Project Server in 2010 is totally, there's a Project Server 2010 product. So I haven't had the experience where you upgrade SharePoint to 2010 and you leave Project Server to 2007. Ideally, they're in a separate environment. I'm not sure what's going to happen if they're in a different, if they're in the same environment.
I would call that not supported. Essentially, especially if it's in the same farm, you're going to have problems. If you've got separate farms, then I haven't run into that case. I haven't heard Microsoft talk to that one. But if it's in the same farm, definitely you need to follow the both plans. You need the project server guys definitely are paying much more attention to SharePoint Server, especially since now they've taken a dependency on it in 2010. But I want to thank everybody who's participated here, and it's been a great chat and lots of good questions. I'm going to take the rest of these and I'm going to answer what I can on my blog. I'm happy to have Dux link to what Dux might include as well. But thanks everybody for joining, and we'll hand this back over.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. I think we all got a lot out of your presentation. I also want to thank all of the attendees that came. There's a lot of great information shared in the chat room, so thanks for your contribution. And as I mentioned before, we'll have a recording of this available shortly. It'll be available in a day or two and we'll send you an email as soon as it's ready. And that's about it. I did want to say before we closed out that I believe our person from the furthest distance was Dhirenendra Yadav from Mumbai. So if you want to go ahead and shoot us an email at webcast@o'reilly.com, you can pick your free ebook. So thanks again, guys. I'll close out the meeting in just a minute.